Hi, everyone in the higher health community. I'm joined here with Dr. Joe Klassen from Rocky Mountain Analytical. And today we just want to highlight the Comprehensive Hormone Insight lab test. This is my favorite advanced hormone test for so many reasons that we're going to cover today. So Dr. Klassen or Dr. Joe, what do you prefer?
Dr. Joe.
Dr. Joe. Tell us how the Comprehensive Hormone Insight test came to be.
Well, this is a really great test. And so at Rocky Mountain Analytical, the lab was founded on saliva testing. And as time went on, technology changed. We were distributing a urine steroid hormone test from various labs in the United States. And, those partnerships, as happens. So we decided to develop our own test. Dr. George Gilson is a MD, PhD. He's a wonderful analytical chemist. He's a great physician. And he decided to do his very, very best. With the backing of Life Labs, the small Rocky Mountain Analytical got the investment we needed to do it. So for about 2 years, we solicited samples from a healthy population to develop the normal ranges. So it's very different than most tests are developed, in that we did not just choose a portion of the reference range and go, okay, you middle 90% are fine and 5% on either end are abnormal, because that doesn't apply to most biological measurements. They're very skewed to one side. So we developed our own reference ranges based on healthy people who did not have the usual complaints for which you might run this test. So we got great naturopaths across Canada helped us to select these people. And we ran the ranges 2 different times to really make sure we had it dialed in. So that's really how we got the test to be, I think, so beautiful. And that George is a wonderful, and as well as some of our other folks at the lab, Travis and Pam, who could take the data and create rules in our information system so that it spits out customized information. So we have ranges for menopausal women, cycling women in their follicular phase or their luteal phase, or for men. And we're able to say, this is what we want to compare you to as an optimal, not as a statistical, being middle of the ground.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I love the reporting that comes out. It's quite overwhelming. I can only imagine from a client end, since it is from a practitioner end, but you're so wonderful in reviewing the test results, and I learn so much every time. And it's just been amazing to see the results and to apply it to patient care. And so you can see there's 29 pages in this report, and exactly what you said, it's very customized based on the results and the screening form that people fill out.
And you're right, it does seem overwhelming at first glance, but it's actually very user-friendly. Mm-hmm. You just have to do it in smaller bites. But keep that in mind for anybody, the practitioners or yourselves, the patients. You don't have to do everything at once. The test, and so is it okay if I scroll a bit?
Sure, yeah. And also, while we're doing this, let's say right off the bat why someone should do this test.
Sure. I think there's a number of reasons why. One, obviously, if you're having hormone-related issues, perimenopause, menopausal symptoms, PMS, but mood and anxiety, because of the great cortisol assessment on here. Mm-hmm. People whose anxiety really is without an explanation. Is it coming from within? Men to set a baseline, for women to set a baseline, and even for fertility. And there's some ways to manipulate this by doing some other testing in the follicular phase and this in the luteal phase. And you'll get a really great view on what's going on. And that's the difference between this and other measurements, is by looking at all the metabolites in their sum, you can figure out the various enzyme pathways. We'll talk about that in some greater detail. Mm-hmm. But the test is easy to read once you know it. That was my anatomy professor, was always her statement. It's easy once you know it. So,
but when you know, you realize how much you don't know.
That's right. The danger is not knowing what you don't know. So, and the test is great. And I'm a very ADHD kind of person, and so it's really forced me to rein it in. Let's So how do we review the test? Well, the summary page, you can make so much information out of it. You can spend your day here and not go to where everything is dissected in much greater depth. So quick glance here guides you to what you might want to be concerned about. This sample report is a great example of that. You know, the androgens seem okay, the progesterone's a bit low, the estrogens are a bit high. What am I going to look at? Well, I'm going to look at those areas in their own section. But we have a great marker for melatonin and for oxidative stress. Does this person need to quench their free radicals so it's not causing damage to DNA and the repercussions that come from that?
Actually, that's my favorite marker of this whole test and would be a big selling feature for why I think people should do this test.
Is it interesting? Do you want to know my favorite marker?
Yes.
It is. I'm going to go. And folks, I don't want to gloss over this too much. It's just that and here's my quote. I'm sure, Terry, you've heard it. But when I get the page, there we are. This is where the fun starts on this page. And right here, can you see my cursor on 17-hydroxy? Oh, look at that. 17-hydroxy Pregnenolone. That is a marker that's not on anybody else's test.
Right.
And what I care about is if when you look upstream, here's cholesterol, here's Pregnenolone. This is the first of those we can measure. But all steroid hormones start right up here with the cholesterol. And they go down and over and down as the parent to all the rest of these. If this is high, it could be PCOS or insulin resistance. But if this is low, is the patient not making any to put down the rest of the pipeline? And you have to look at mitochondrial function due to low thyroid, due to toxicities, due to post-viral mitochondrial damage. Because if this is deficient and everything below is, you got to start at the top. You can do everything right, but it tells you that there's a fundamental problem.
So just to explain that just slightly, mitochondria are your powerhouse of every cell. And so talk about energy and low energy. When someone is experiencing low energy, one of the roots we want to look at is mitochondrial function. And so are you saying that if someone is low pregnenolone, one of the main things you look at is mitochondrial deficiency because they're not making enough pregnenolone?
That's correct. And there's a number of reasons why that occurs. That's for a more in-depth interview, but it's our little secret that can really give you something. If you only looked at the serum, the blood values, you would never ever figure out why is this patient globally.
Right. Okay, great. I love knowing that's your favorite marker. And I also like that this test looks at melatonin.
That's correct. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So in short, everyone should take this test because
it tells you what's going on at a deeper level. And okay, that's great to know. Yeah, sure. But what that means is your qualified ND can look at those pathways and say, oh, well, we know we can shift those this way or that way. You know, how we can manipulate using nutrition, using lifestyle, using herbs, or perhaps using, pharma if that ends up being appropriate. Some people are not in a good place. And I don't apologize that, we also have the gift of pharma and the gift of herbs used well, intelligently, and applied and monitored. It might be, but you've got the information to back it up.
Right. It's not just
says this.
Yeah, it's not just showing. So serum would be showing progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, cortisol, and often it's hard to get a medical doctor to even run those markers because they don't feel it tells us enough through blood, which in some ways I would agree. So this test being urine, it's giving us those main hormone markers, but even more so, it's showing us the downstream byproducts of that and how it flows through the pathway, and it's also telling the precursor. So as Dr. Joe is saying, you get a much bigger picture of the whole team. And one analogy I'd love to share, and I'm always open for people's favorite analogies because they're such a great way to explain. I look at this whole hormone pathway or hormone heat map as a bed sheet. So we have our mattress and we fit the bed sheet around the mattress and it's nice and smooth. But when some of your hormones go off, that's like one of the corners has flipped up. And so then it's going to have a ripple effect to other corners or other areas. And so what we're looking to do with this whole pathway is just smooth it out and make sure the bed sheet is nice and rounded on your mattress.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I can talk about this test all day. I do talk about this test all day.
Yeah.
But you asked, you know, so, what makes this test reliable? Well, it's the background of, you know, fantastic analytical chemistry, but also the ability to put it into a clinical perspective. The data means nothing without understanding the patient.
Right.
You know, what's consistent with the data in the patient picture, what's not. And so one of the comments I often use is many of the hormones follow the Goldilocks phenomenon. There's too much, too little, and just right. And sometimes too much and too little can have some similarities. You know, a high thyroid may see hair loss, a low thyroid may see hair loss. High cortisol is anxiety, low cortisol is anxiety.
Yeah.
So which you would have to treat those very differently.
Yeah.
And the beauty of seeing through the test. But reliability is really fastidious lab chemistry and really well researched commentary. We had a wonderful young man in who had his master's again in chemistry. For a year, he went through all the literature that we could find for all the things we comment on. And a lot of things that were well accepted in the medical community actually don't have a lot of support. And we found a lot of recent research. So, you know, we've developed this booklet. I'm sure you've seen it. I know you can see it there. But what's important about this is that we've studied.
Oh, I can't really see it.
Yeah, but the document shows these pathways that you're seeing here and more. But what will affect them that might explain what's going on, or that you could use as a strategy to treat it.
Okay.
So great resource that has that backing. So that's what makes this test reliable. And
can you tell it or share a few clinical stories of that you've seen with this test?
Sure. You know, I think that one of the biggest things we've learned is that, you know, it's a hormone test. So how do we change the hormones, right? I guess that would be a typical approach, and why wouldn't it be? But what we've seen is that there's more to the story, and that's the conversation about the bile acid. Because bile acids are all made from a steroid molecule, and it is not the primary route of elimination of all the steroids, but it's a significant route, especially for the androgens and the estrogens, but also somewhat the cortisol. And so we say, hey, this is how we'll improve, you know, too much or too little estrogen.
And bile acids, for people listening to this, are found in digestive enzymes. So it's really neat to know that taking a digestive enzyme, the right one, can actually have an impact on your hormones.
Right. And what we've seen is that, you know, we talked about adrenal fatigue in the past, and that's really losing favor, that concept. But what we see is what would stop your adrenal gland from producing cortisol is when you're not getting rid of bile at the liver. And there's this non-alcoholic fatty liver, which ends up in a lot of even healthy living women. You know, and it has to do with estrogens in the liver. Again, its own lecture. Talk to Tara later, we'll do it again. But it's we see the bile backing up and telling the hypothalamus and pituitary to not make any cortisol, because the bile looks so much like cortisol to some of our receptors that messes up that whole balance. So it's not treated by giving this patient cortisol. It's treated by getting them ultimately to, forgive me, poop out their bile properly. So this is where the digestive tract comes into the endocrine system, tying them together. And, you know, our elders in naturopathic medicine knew that. Treat the gut, treat the liver. And now coming back to that with some very good science that's saying, yeah, you got to fix this other system, which is having an effect on the hormone system, right?
Can you just say that again? When you don't have enough bile acid, your cortisol is affected which way?
So when you don't release bile into the digestive tract, means the bile is backed up in the liver and therefore in systemic circulation. So there's a bile acid called CDCA. And if that is not leaving, then you will not make cortisol.
Got it.
So that's this profound fatigue and inability to get motivation and stimulation for the day.
And we talk about liver function for improving thyroid metabolism and just detoxing our environment.
Yeah.
Which actually brings us to another important marker to touch on for the purposes of this mini review, and then we definitely need to do it again. I see a title, Digestion plus Endocrine, coming.
Oh yeah.
But methylation. Can you touch on the methylation marker and show that to us?
Sure. It's going to be way down in the estrogens. And so this methylation marker is called COMT, catechol O-methyltransferase. And one of the final steps in getting rid of estrogens is
up a bit, yeah.
And so here's the estrogen heat map, and you can see estrone and estradiol, they need to go north and south, right, to leave. But this last step is methylation. And so, you add a hydroxyl group and then a methyl group, and it can go away. If we're not methylating, then these will, again, back up, leading to an abundance of these estrogens and an estrogen dominant state. This is not the MTHFR methylation variation that you might hear a lot of talk about in various medical pages. But it's similar function. You have to support this enzyme for the final clearance of estrogen. And if not, then there's a reason why it's backing up. So it's a great therapeutic target. This patient may not be having the classic reasons, particularly obesity, why we might see high estrogens. And yet, she's a slender and athletic individual, but has high estrogen symptoms. And this is why.
Because they're not clearing the estrogens. We have easy terms, good estrogens and bad estrogens, and we want to keep clearing up those negative estrogens. Okay, so what we see on this test then is this person is a high methylator, so they are able to clear the estrogens. But what I look for in clients is when they are a low methylator and how that is impacting their symptoms.
Right.
So a low methylator, we would see them shaded here. And then what do you often see in terms of estrogens with a low methylator?
Well, it's that, I say it's heat, right? It's a lot of the perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms. But when it's really high, it could be going down the toxic pathway, which is this 4-hydroxy pathway that I'm circling. And you don't want much going there. So this patient's in a great spot. It's very low. But inability to lose weight, estrogen begets more estrogen.
Yeah.
So if patients are having a challenge maintaining a healthy weight, I've also seen when all of this clearance in the various methods that we've just talked about is impaired, I've seen that damage the fertility, because there's so much hormone in circulation. The sensors are overloaded and saying tilt, nothing's going to go on here because that's just wrong. And so that's a great thing is, we got to help the liver, and we're going to see these things change.
So I have a really great final question for you here, a practical question of a client question and insight that came up just yesterday. So she'll love that I'm bringing this up with you. She's an A+ patient, always just keen and doing everything and listening to her body. So she recognized, she actually showed low methylation capacity. And I'll go back to her test results to see where she's showing in the estrogen. but low methylation. And then she noticed by taking DIM, so DIM is a support that clears out these negative estrogens. She noticed she was feeling highly anxious right before her period, that she'd never had this symptom before, and she was wondering if it was the DIM. And so my take on it was, well, you say first.
Well, yeah, so if the DIM, so will drive from here to here. And if that's backing up and not leaving, you've got more of this form we call capsule. And this one. And if they're not clearing, it's just going to make her, toxic, because you're driving a pathway that's bottlenecked at the end.
And so the treatment for that would be to improve methylation
and perhaps things like constipation. If there's a failure to release that bile, ultimately, the thing we can manipulate most is to increase its release via the stool.
So she is taking bile acids, digestive, and then would you advise stopping the DIM
until you get the methylation sorted out? Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. See, a great insight from this hormone test. It just is so comprehensive. You get a lot of information. You can keep digging in. And so, Dr. Joe, I'd love to speak further with you and share clinical stories. So let's count this as part one.
Let's do
that. Yeah. How's the weather in Calgary, just while we end off here?
We're having a rainy day, so.
Rainy, all right.
Tomatoes need it, so we're good.
Nice. I just planted tomatoes in the backyard, and I'm excited to see them grow.
Good for you.
Well, thank you again, and we'll Zoom soon.
Been a pleasure. Look forward to it. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thanks.
Joe. And, oops, I'm still here. Okay, I don't see where to close my microphone. Oh, there it is. Okay, stop recording.